This man figured out how to manipulate the masses to be totally under his control, without anyone even knowing. Have you ever wondered why Americans eat bacon for breakfast, especially when there are so many better options? Well, this man was the mastermind behind it. In the early 1900s, most people only had a light breakfast, such as a small roll or a bowl of cereal. But when a big bacon company decided they wanted more money, they approached an expert at propaganda, Edward Bernays. It was him who recognized the opportunity for bacon at the breakfast table. But how do you convince the vast American public to change their eating habits? Luckily for Bernays, he figured out something that no one else knew. He realized that if you want to influence the masses, you have to target those that already influence the masses. Humans are by nature very social creatures. We absorb many of our opinions from the people we interact with and the groups that we are part of. An example that Bernays referred to was a man sat alone in his room deciding what stocks to buy. The man believes that his choices are based on his judgment alone. In truth, his mind has been stamped on by outside influences that control his thoughts. The railway stock he chooses happened to be in the headlines yesterday, and so comes to his mind the most prominently. He also had a positive experience last time he was on one of their trains, remembers their reputation for honesty, and has heard that JP Morgan owns some of their shares. Absent of these influences, and he likely would have chosen another stock. Edward Bernays recognized this and used it to his advantage. When trying to sell bacon, he asked himself, who is it that influences the public's eating decisions? At the time, the answer was undoubtedly doctors. What your doctor told you was good to eat, you would eat. Knowing this, Bernays approached the doctor, asking him a very well-crafted question. Would a larger meal in the morning be better for people's health? The doctor answered yes. Having more energy in the morning would be a good thing. And conveniently, the doctor watched for him, so he got him to write to 5,000 of his doctor friends, asking if they agreed. Enough of them replied that he could make a bold statement in newspaper headlines. 4,500 physicians urged Americans to eat hearty breakfast to improve their health. Many of the articles then went on to encourage bacon and eggs as the perfect hearty breakfast. The efforts were hugely successful, and now in America, 70% of bacon is eaten at breakfast. But that's just one of the many ways that Bernays changed culture for his own benefit. In 1927, Bernays was hired by Chesterfield Cigarettes, where he concocted a campaign to harm the perception of their competitor, Lucky Strike. This campaign was so effective that the competing brands were adamant on hiring Bernays to work for them instead. So the next year, Bernays developed a new stunt. During this time, it was rare for women to be seen smoking outdoors, as it was viewed as something only prostitutes did. So Lucky Strike knew that if they could improve women's attitudes towards smoking, their sales would rise dramatically. To achieve this, Bernays tried to capitalize on an organic trend that he had observed. He noticed that some women were taking up smoking as an act of rebellion against female oppression, since cigarettes were so heavily equated with masculinity. Bernays knew this could be a big opportunity. He believed that propaganda was often the most effective when used simply to introduce a cause to those that would spread it. For example, a company that sells soap may recognize the harmful effects of certain cosmetics and begin a campaign against them, urging people to return to their washcloth and soap. Health officials everywhere would agree with this sentiment and thus would join them in the campaign, in the interest of the public. With so many health officials on their side, the campaign is likely to be so much more effective and sales of soap to skyrocket. Edward Bernays believed that propagandists are often the masterminds behind the public's drive for societal change, as they know this activism will be beneficial for their own self-interest. So Bernays aimed to put this principle into action. Bernays had his secretary, Bertha Hunt, pretend to be a women's activist. She would convince other women to join the Feminist Torches of Freedom campaign, completely disguising any involvement with cigarette companies. On March 31st, 1929, news was made of 10 women repeatedly smoking cigarettes during the Easter parade in New York City. There were also similar marches in Boston, Detroit, and San Francisco. The event was covered all across the media, with only a few suspecting it to be a publicity stunt. Quickly, the social stigma around women smoking started to break down, and they would become symbols of female liberation instead. Central to Bernays' approach to public relations was what he called the group mind. Bernays was the nephew of famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, and so he had a close connection to the field of psychology. He believed if you could understand the group mind, you could control the masses. And this is what allowed him to innovate advertising forever. Before Bernays, marketing was focused on telling the reader to buy their product right now. The aim was to break down any sales resistance by using constant repetition and placing emphasis on the individual. But rather than attack sales resistance, Bernays believed in removing it altogether. The old way was to say, you, buy this piano now. It's cheap, it's good, it will last for years. But every piano company says that, and there are also a million other things that people have been urged to buy. Bernays believed that people didn't buy a new car over a new piano because they necessarily wanted a new car more than a piano, but because it was instead the current trend for people to do so. Therefore, the job of the piano salesman is to modify that trend. But how the hell does he do that? First of all, he appeals to the home instinct. Homes represent security, comfort, family, and more. And as such, people have deep psychological connections to them. Bernays suggested getting the public to accept the idea of a music room in the home. This sounds like an impossible task, but it's one only Bernays could do. His method was to organise an exhibition of music rooms designed by well-known decorators, who themselves have their own influence on customers. You would then enhance the prestige of these rooms by adding in extra luxurious details. Next, you would create an event to show off the rooms and would build hype around them. You would invite key influential people to the event, such as famous violinists and artists. These people will influence other people, lifting the idea of the music room into the public consciousness. At the same time, you would persuade influential architects to add a music room to their designs, perhaps with a convenient place for a piano. This will, in turn, plant the idea of a music room into the minds of the general public. Bernays believed the music room would be accepted because it would become the thing, and the person with a music room would naturally think to buy a piano to place in it. The old way of advertising was to say, "Please buy a piano." The new way had reversed this to make the customer say, "Please sell me a piano."